Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8 minutes before 8, let's suspend our conversation concerning events in Ukraine and come back to this country and talk about extra school places and extra schools, it would appear, and get some of these points from Conservative MP and School Standards Minister Robin Walker, who joins me now. I have a press release from your colleagues here. Up to 14,000 extra school places will be created for pupils, Minister. Are these places then that don't currently exist? How come they're extra? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. This is extra places in new schools. So fundamentally what we're talking about here is where there is a real need for new schools, whether that is in mainstream or whether it's in the specialist sector. We want to make sure that we're meeting that need. Now, demographically, we've been through a bit of a bulge and there is not perhaps the huge expansion of need for schools in mainstream that we've had in some previous years. But we are seeing, particularly in some areas of disadvantage, where there isn't the opportunity for people to progress for post 16. We want to fill that gap. We want to make sure that there's the opportunity for everybody to have the chance to study, to go to university, should they choose to do so, or pursue vocational routes such as T-levels. And therefore, we are providing this investment in 15 new mainstream schools. Alongside that, up to 60 new specialist and alternative provision schools to make sure that the very apparent need up and down the country for high need specialist places is met. And that's as part of a £2.6 billion programme of investment that was announced at the spending review that will deliver both this new provision that we're talking about today and new bases in mainstream schools and expansion of existing provision in the specialist sector.
So this is to assist 16-year-olds who currently could leave school, could go off to do other things. There will be additional places, T-levels and matters such as that. Is that right, Minister?
Exactly. And this is also about targeting the support to where it's most needed. So we have 55 education investment areas in areas which have traditionally underperformed educationally. Some of those areas simply don't have the post-16 provision that they need. So we hope that as part of this programme, we can meet that need and fill those gaps.
OK, while I have the benefit of you on the line, just a couple of other matters. Your working life is spent, obviously, with concerns about young people. Are you in support of one of the recommendations concerning the smoking review yesterday, that each year the minimum age at which people can buy a tobacco product, a cigarette, would go up each year, annually, by a year, until the point where no one can buy them? Would you support such a move?
I think it's right that we should be protecting children from the dangers of smoking. So I think it's absolutely right to look at issues around that. I have to say it's distinctly beyond my brief when it gets to above school age children. I wouldn't necessarily.
But you'd have a view, wouldn't you?
Express an opinion on that.
I mean, if this goes on after a few years, a dozen or so years, you'll have someone at age 30 who can't buy a cigarette. Would you be in support of that?
No, I think it is right that we draw a distinction between adults and children in this respect. I'm all in favour of protecting children from the dangers of smoking, and I think it's right that we can take action to do that. But I think adults need to be free to make their choices, and as long as smoking is legal, I don't think we should be restricting that when it comes to people over the age of 18.
You've got a tricky brief in schools. Reminding my listeners, you were Northern Ireland Minister as well prior to that. We hear legislation could be brought before Parliament on Monday to change parts of the protocol. Is the protocol working? If not, why? And what needs to change, Minister?
I heard consistently during my time as Northern Ireland Minister deep concerns about some of the inner workings of the protocol. And the frustration here is that there was always supposed to be a process to address these through the committee system that was set up with the UK and the EU. Those meetings have taken place, but we simply have not seen the movement that would actually address the genuine issues that people in Northern Ireland are facing with the workings of the protocol. And so I think it's right that the government has to look at all tools at its disposal within the law to make sure that it can deliver on what we all want to see, which is the protection of the Good Friday Agreement, the protection of the way of life of people in Northern Ireland that allows them to identify as British or Irish or both, and the protection within that of the United Kingdom. I think it's right that the government should take action to address that, and we should absolutely continue to talk to the EU and to try and make sure that we can do this in a way that we can both agree on.
So it does need some kind of change then, Minister, just to clarify.
Yeah, and I think the Prime Minister has been clear about that. I think Liz Truss, I know, has been repeatedly engaging with Maros Sefcovic over this, and we've been making the case that these changes need to happen. I'm confident that whatever it is brought forward, and I don't have sight of that, and whenever it is brought forward, the proposals from the government would be reasonable, would be absolutely designed to make sure that we are able to deliver on our international agreements, including, crucially, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
Back to your schools brief, the drumbeat of industrial action on our railways grows ever louder potentially this summer. You're probably aware that now one of the drivers' unions is also supporting strike action. How concerned are you this could affect students who rely on trains to get to schools to take their GCSEs and A-level exams, Minister?
I'm deeply concerned. It's a great and positive thing that we have exams underway and that students are, reaping the rewards of all their hard work over the years by being able to take part in those. It would be terrible if in any way this were disrupted by further industrial action. I understand at least one of the days that it's been mooted is on a weekend, which is welcome from my perspective. But fundamentally, I don't want to see strikes interrupting children's opportunities in life. And I think the unions need to think very carefully about this, need to recognise that they are better off coming back to the negotiating table, engaging in a constructive negotiation about the future of railways, in which the government has invested £16 billion to keep them running through the pandemic, and make sure actually that they can deliver on their public sector duty to get people to schools, to work, and that's something that I think I would strongly urge that they don't disrupt the exam period. That has a long-term impact on children's lives, and I just think that would be unacceptable.
Again, staying with schools, I would imagine you're a fan of discipline. Can I take you to the Millfield High School in Thornton in Lancashire? I don't expect you to know about this story, so I will tell you about it. Where the rules are every pupil must have 2 pens, a pencil and a ruler in their pencil case. If they forget twice in a week, they face detention. 3 times leads to a fixed-term exclusion. Many of the parents are furious. One little girl, in fact, her father has said that this is a first strike on her education career and it's not fair. Is it too draconian?
I haven't seen the detail of that, and I want to look into the detail, understand the nature of the sanctions that they're talking about. But I was actually at a school just yesterday, which was looking at a system of support for good behaviour and reinforcing that, which included having the right equipment at the beginning of every lesson. And I think it's right, but what we should be doing with schools is trying to support them to create cultures of good behaviour, explaining to children in those schools why behaviour matters, why getting things right is important, and having the right equipment for lessons is important so that it doesn't disrupt lessons, but doing it in a constructive way. And this shouldn't be about detentions and penalising people unnecessarily. Clearly, we don't want to see unnecessary exclusions from schools, but what we actually see is where schools get their behaviour policies right and create a good, strong culture of behaviour, exclusions can be reduced. And the school I visited yesterday was a good example of that. It was a school that had been highlighted some years ago by Ofsted as having behaviour problems, but they had had no exclusions since 2017. And by introducing a rigorous but reasonable behaviour policy, and one that engages both with children and parents, they were able to turn around the culture of behaviour and do it in a supportive way. We're investing £10 million in behaviour hubs to work with schools and make sure that we actually get that positive culture of behaviour delivered to more schools more effectively. It's good for pupils, it's good for teachers where we can do that, and it's right that schools should work with their parents and their parental body to ensure that any concerns are addressed.
Lastly, referencing what we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday, when was the last time one of the good folk of Worcester came to your surgery and they're saying they were living on benefits and they wanted to buy their own home?
Actually, I have raised this issue of people living in registered social landlord properties being unable to exercise the right of buy as long ago as 2013 in Parliament and again in 2015. It is a real issue, and I think anything we can do to address that and make sure that the right to buy opportunity reaches more people would be positive. We need to do it, though, in a way that makes sure we continue to invest in our social housing stock and have that at least 1-to-1 return of properties. And I'm glad that what's been set out appears to address that. I don't think this is just about benefits. I think this is about removing some of the disincentives for people to be able to move on to their own home, and removing some of the bars currently that we have in the distinction between the small number of properties up and down the country that remain in the hands of local authorities and a much larger number that sit with registered social landlords.
Grateful for your time today. Thank you. Schools Minister Robin Walker appearing here on LBC. We're at 2 minutes after 8. The news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the congressional panel investigating last year's riots at the US Capitol has laid the blame firmly on Donald Trump. The House committee says the